We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Our topic today, the majors and their new energy transition strategies. This name is transition sometimes cause problems, but is the name. This is Professor Cleveland Jones, international consultant, researcher at INOG, member of Geoscience Advisory Board of NXT in Canada, I suppose. He can confirm for us. Advisor for geopolitics and energy industry. Good afternoon, Professor. Welcome.
Hi, Kavaya. It's good to be with you again. Good
This
topic.
company, NXT, is in Canada, located in Canada?
Yes, it's in Calgary. It's a new technology for exploration, identifying resources in oil and gas. Completely new thing, very attractive. We
It's not,
happen to win best exploration technology of 24 of 19.
but it's not seismic companies.
No, not
no.
seismic. You know that I have espoused the thought that technology is key for anything. And in the energy sector, the same thing. Artificial intelligence helps a lot, but we have to keep pounding away at basic technology.
But this company uses planes to acquire data? Okay.
Yeah, aero, geophysical surveys, quicker, faster, cheaper, less risk. You know, seismic is king, and the energy transition, whenever, if it ever really happens as we expect, will be on the back of the oil and gas industry. And the oil and gas industry itself has to modernize and so on. And, you know, at some point we can talk about it, but it's very big.
Okay, excellent. Let me share a screen because this is the article that motivated us to debate today. And the question that I could address for you, Professor, are the companies lost?
No, Kavaya, all the majors are run by smart people, and they know what they're doing, except that, you know, the environment in which they operate is very tricky. It's a politically changing environment, as we saw in the US, even in Europe. And, you know, a strategy is based on underlying hypotheses, and it's all probabilistic. You know, how will this happen and that happen? We know some of the major changes that are going on in politics, but we don't know the repercussions. We don't know what they mean in practice in terms of laws, rules, even popular sentiment, and even business conditions. So as smart as they are, really, it does not mean that they will get it right. I think our discussions may help them get it right because we bring out, you know, thinking topics for their thinking. That's one of the reasons why I'd like to share a screen just to start off here.
Yeah, sure. And do you have slides for today?
Yeah, here.
Perfect.
You look at this. I think we showed something similar. You know, this is environmental sentiment of, you know, major concerns in Europe, the European Union. But you see there that green line is environmental concerns are relatively low on the scale, and they're falling. Some other sentiments are growing, and of course that also follows some political tendencies and so on. But if
so
we
you mean that the green is going down?
The
environmental and climate change.
The concern about that. So that shows, you know, that as much as we think, oh, Europe is green and so on, yes, well, they are, but the actual popular sentiment is not that strong. And there's a lot of other overriding concerns. Certainly, money is always there, you know, rising prices, inflation, and they're concerned about immigration, of course.
And which variable is growing? Which one?
For example, immigration, terrorism. You know, those are things that are popular nowadays, and they may last longer or not. But in terms of environmental concerns and so on, it wasn't really the top concern. So this is a realization that the oil companies, especially the majors who have to follow the tendencies, have to take into consideration. But it's really a
Yeah,
lot more
yeah.
complicated or
Let's
nuanced
interrupt.
than that.
Could you please come
Yeah,
back?
go back here.
Yeah, go back. Uh, it's your control. The yellow one, energy supply,
Yeah.
means that is becoming better at this time.
Yeah, well, when the gas prices shot up, everybody was very concerned because money out of your pocket hurts.
Mhm.
When the U.S. started exporting a lot of LNG and Europe started creating some buffer supplies for natural gas and so on, those concerns diminished. So it's very understandable that people's concern follow more or less what is the biggest spike of the moment. If it's prices of natural gas, of course, they're in 22, they were very concerned about it. But now things get normalized and say, well, supply is not that big a deal. Russia can fall off the cliff, but we still have natural gas from other
And,
sources.
and considering that Mr. Trump, January 2025, said that will end every war in the world, this this curve can go to zero.
Yeah, well, I think people recognize that there's a big disconnect with promises and reality. That goes for any administration. Certainly, it goes for whatever Trump says. But the bottom line is maybe some things are more believable. Obviously, support for fossil fuels, for the oil and gas industry, for less restrictions on their operations. Yes, that is very likely a very strong possibility. But how that translates into popular sentiment is much more nuanced because if you believe this is for Europe, but if you go to the United States, like I wanted to show, even the conservative coalition uh, does a survey, and there is strong support for so-called clean energy. That doesn't mean that they want to do away with fossil fuels. It just means that they like clean energy. Who doesn't like clean energy? Just like who doesn't like something beautiful? It's just what does that mean in terms of legislation? Are you willing to force internal combustion engines to stop being produced? No, that's a different thing. But the sentiment is there. And that is something that the oil companies have to be able
Yeah.
to deal with.
And when you mention clean energy, includes solar, wind, nuclear,
Solar,
hydro,
wind, nuclear, and carbon capture and storage
and
projects,
hydro, of course.
and hydro. Everybody, I guess, generally is more positive on hydro on some of these surveys. But critically, when there are some diehards that are just, if you mention clean energy, they say no. But that's a very small minority. In general, you see that whether it's rural or overall or cities, people, even conservative majority here, are in favor of clean energy. So this also helps mold the regulations and the legislation going forward. You're not going to be able to get something in terms of Congress and the Senate in the United States that is absolutely against clean energy. That's not what politicians can do because their constituents don't want that. On the other hand, it's even more complicated than that because if you look at Republicans, for example, who now have the majority in Senate and Congress and the president, even they favor more offshore oil and gas drilling, meaning less restrictions on the oil and gas industry, but they also favor more solar energy. They also favor more wind energy. They also favor, they also favor hydraulic fracturing and fracking, but they are in favor of some of these alternative energies. It's much more complicated than all yes or all no. And if you go to providing tax credit for developing carbon capture technology, which was something a lot of the diehard people on the fossil fuel industry say, "Oh, that's crazy," but there's popular support because people are concerned about some of the climate change discussions. And even though there's some deniers way off on one end, the general sentiment is that that seems to make sense, and they're
Yeah.
willing to provide incentives for that.
The last
That's a
point,
reality.
yeah, the last point require most new buildings to be run
Yeah.
on electricity with no
Yeah.
gas lines.
Okay, that is an excessive requirement, and obviously, in that sense, people are not in favor of that. Only only the Democrats favor something like that. The Republicans don't. I think here it's important to look at the Republican sentiment because the top lines are all associated.
But Professor, the point is it feasible to run without gas lines? No.
No, of course not. But one thing is sentiment. The other thing is reality. Can the infrastructure do this? Can the economy support that? No. What I'm saying is that this sentiment is what drives legislation. Even because
And
politicians,
decisions. Yeah.
even Republicans, they have to be true to their constituencies. And if they say no, we favor more trees in terms of greening the world. We like tax credit for carbon capture and storage. That might be
I know
silly for some.
that are sentiments and perception, but they do not know about details or technical details because it's impossible to run without gas
Exactly.
lines.
But politicians don't necessarily follow
care
technical
about that.
details. We've seen that. They've gone off on I wouldn't say extreme, but they went to way over to one side, and now we are facing maybe a backlash. And just like you pointed, some companies recognize that they went too far with some of their policies. So this is a reset, and everything has cycles, and pendulum goes one way and then it comes back the other. It doesn't mean that it goes from extreme to extreme. Sometimes the pendulum is in the middle, off to one side and off to the other. And this is what I think is most likely to happen, is to have a readjustment, an adjustment towards less drastic measures.
Yeah.
You can see that the drastic measures just don't have much support. So the drivers of the policies that the oil and gas companies take, the policies that they develop, have to take this into consideration, because even though they're not politicians that have to obey constituencies, they have to answer to society in one way, but they also have to answer to their shareholders. So their policies, first and foremost, they have to have financial stability, profitability, disperse dividends and cash back to investors, that kind of thing. That's what private companies do. But they also have to be tuned in on geopolitical factors. If the new administration in the U.S., for example, is warning of potential conflicts with Iran and many other countries, well, you have to stay away from some parts of the world where your investments might be at risk if policies go that way. Obviously, they have to look for operational efficiency.
No doubt.
And recognizing the new reality of the presidency with Trump, the Congress and the Senate with Republicans.
It changed in the regulatory environment.
They recognize that. So they're ready. Okay, you're pro oil and gas. We'll free up more areas for exploration. We'll do that. That can be done easily and quickly.
But this regulatory environment is not exaggerated. This time is not too much, much more than we need.
That is a judgment of that I don't think we can make at this point. I think maybe in 5 years we might see where we should lay. Obviously, the sentiment is that as you're saying, that we're regulating and restricting too much fossil fuels.
As in Brazil, for instance, with equatorial margin.
Yeah, and providing incentives that are excessive for clean energy. So even if the pendulum goes back a little bit, there's still room in a Trump and Republican Congress to advance some things. And oil companies are aware of that. But they also know that the IRA and some subsidies are at risk. So some of the projects, wind projects and other, you remember last time I said wind projects are doomed in 5 years or so.
Yeah.
But they recognize that. But there are some clean energies that can go forward. As you saw, sentiment for solar energy is very positive, even among Republicans. Texas is a solar powerhouse. But the fact is that, for example, the COP29, really, sure, everybody tries to put a good spin on it. Oh, we achieved something. But in reality, it was a disappointment. And that sends a message, because it sends a message that now we don't have as clear a mandate to pursue clean energies, to focus on transition, and so on. They can walk back some of those measures that they had adopted because they follow what they perceive as the sentiment, and now they adjust. So it's not just BP and Shell and Exxon and Chevron that are doing that. The oil companies in general recognize we have to reassess our clean energy and energy transition policies.
Yeah, but for instance, before the last one, subsidies and renewable at risk. But if we talk about EVs and $7,500 per car, it's impossible to survive with this.
It's from I mean, as you know, I'm an economist by graduation, but it doesn't make sense to run an economy on subsidies of that type. You have to provide subsidies that are technology neutral. And I think that came out recently.
For science, for research, and not for commercial issues.
But even if you provide incentives, the joint Republican and Democratic legislation for providing technology neutral incentives, that is maybe a blueprint for how, even in this new environment, technology neutral policies can advance. For example, you can say, oh, we need efficiency, or we need grid improvements, because that is a requirement. Those things can survive almost in any political environment. Yeah. But see, these are the drivers that we talk about. But look, there's a second part to it. There's also clean energy efforts. They didn't disappear. They just changed. They're reduced in some cases, but they still exist. Oil companies, including oil companies, cannot ignore that and say, hey, we have nothing more to do with that. That is a risky path as well. They can't go all the way one side or the other. And 4 years from now or whatever, they could also suffer consequences. So they have to hedge their bets. And they have to meet the market demand for their basic products, which is oil and gas. And that is a critical demand that they face. Oil and gas companies have to provide oil and gas. If they decide to do something else and invest in biofuels, okay. But first and foremost, they have to provide oil and gas. If they don't, then they're in trouble, because that's what one expects from them. And in the United States in particular, if oil and gas companies are not providing enough product to keep prices low, which is a supply and demand balance, gasoline prices go up, and that is a critical problem for oil and gas companies. They see fossil fuel demand growing. You and I have discussed this. It's not just petrochemicals, but I show this because that is one area where there's a pretty good consensus that demand is going to go up. And there's also demand for oil and gas, and we discussed many forecasts. Some are on the low side, but there's obviously continuing demand for oil and gas.
But it's good to see that only 10 or 15% of oil is directed to petrochemicals. The other
I think it's actually near 20. but it
for
can go
fuels.
up. It can actually go up despite
Yeah, the
biofuels.
forecast is to reach 30% or 35% in 10 or 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, but that is a reality that they can't escape. We can't let the petrochemical industry
Since we do
not be
not have a
supplied.
replacement, since
So
we do
far,
not,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and even biofuels will be a replacement for bioplastics. This will, and they'll take 20 years to really rev up. So this is a reality that they have to meet,
Yes,
just
it is.
as a reality for gas. LNG demand worldwide.
I
We
suppose it's
discussed
more
this.
complicated, this one.
Yeah, but we discussed this. You can't say, "Oh, natural gas is fossil fuel, so it's bad." No, the realization that is coming clear is the natural gas is pretty clean. It is still a fossil fuel, but you can't compare apples and oranges. So natural gas has to be let to be developed in the U.S. In Europe, it will assume a bigger portion of the energy matrix. Even China, even India are implementing plans to grow their LNG imports because they recognize that as long as the U.S. and Qatar and so on increase their LNG capacity, prices will be relatively low, and they will be able to substitute some other energies with LNG, which is clean, not just because of emissions, but because of pollution concerns. We discussed this. In China and India, people are dying not because of CO2, but because of soot from burning coal and even from burning oil for electricity generation. This is a problem that natural gas deals with. So there is no question that that the oil and gas companies recognize that energies in terms of fossil fuels will be growing, but the investment in fossil fuels is trailing. We saw this, a tremendous amount of investment going into so-called clean alternative energies. Maybe some of that will be reduced in this new scenario that we're talking about. Yes, but it will be reduced not by half, not drastically. The curves might tend to close a little bit, but they're not going to close in the next 5 years. They're going to make.
But if investment isn't one vision, but the other side, the results that we can reach with these investments.
Exactly. So, but in conjunction, this is powerful. You see that a lot of investment is going to clean energy, but the clean energies require 2 or 3 times, and in some cases 20 times more capital for the same amount of result. So it's almost a wasted investment because the results are small in the near term. This is absolutely recognized by the oil companies. They know that their investment dollars can go very far if they invest in oil and natural gas, and generating electricity from those is cheap.
And where is oil in this chart? It's not oil here.
Not here, but in fact, maybe oil is not the top use in generating electricity, maybe for driving cars and so on. But for electricity generation, obviously, the capital cost of nuclear, of course, is something else. But even for wind and solar, it's high in relation to gas.
And oil is not used normally for electricity.
For electricity generation.
Is the case, yeah.
Yeah, but it's important for them to recognize that these two graphs together show that we're doing both things wrong. We're investing a lot of dollars into clean energies that don't provide the electricity that people want, and we're wasting that because the capital expenditure is a lot. So if we were to take some of that investment, plow it back into oil and gas, especially into some of the cleaner fossils like natural gas, we could get much more, many more results. And this is a tendency. It's not because the popular sentiment understands this. The oil companies understand this, but it happens to be driving it that way. So this is very important realization for them. So they develop their strategies, they have to meet shareholder expectations. They have to meet oil and gas demand. They have to convince the public, even Republicans, that they're making some effort in energy transition. Not a big effort, but some effort. And because of that, I think some of their efforts into clean energy will receive a lot of PR. They may invest 1%, but say, "Hey, we're into clean energy." That was already happening. We discussed some programs ago that a lot of hype about clean energy investments. More so now because they will be reduced, but they will still say, "Oh, we're still investing in clean energy," but of course not very much. And then the rest of these strategies, they're not that different than what we discussed some programs back. This is the new realization of the oil companies in the environment in which they operate. They have to develop known resources which require less capital and so on. They prefer unconventional resources which are fast to implement.
This chart is missing decarbonization. It's not here.
Exactly. Decarbonization falls into clean energy investments. And right now, I think this is one area where the very expensive projects, and there's projects at $100 per ton and so on. There's projects at 600 and 800. Of course, people will say, "Oh, our project costs 800, but it will be competitive in the future." Yes, 20 years from now. So those are probably going to be slowed down, stopped, whatever. But some decarbonization projects will go on. Carbon capture and storage, conventional plowing underground. That's inexpensive. That's likely to continue. But they have to concentrate their investments in the fossil fuel industry in large, safe, prolific, resilient plays, not in crisis areas, not just Russia, not in some places in the Middle East and so on. There will be more consolidation. That's a strategy that is very favorable because it goes right down to the bottom line in savings. It has been going on in the shale patch. It will continue to go on. Maybe even smaller companies will join because there aren't that many big ones left to do that. And of course, another realization is if there are going to be investments in clean energy, it is not so much the oil industry that will make them. Mm-hmm. Other investors, if you want it, you invest in it, not us. We're oil and gas companies. This is our core business. And I think this is a correct posture from an oil and gas company. If you want a new industry, solar and wind and so on, build it, invest in it. We're doing fine with oil and gas. And I think it's also important that, yes, there are some societal pressures and even regulatory pressures for cleaner energy and so on. These things will continue to exist, but the oil and gas companies face a very stark reality. If for some reason they don't invest enough in oil and gas, and 2, 3, 4 years from now, not just because of the war, but because supply and demand side gets off balance because we don't have enough oil and gas production in terms of demand.
Price can go up.
Prices will go up and heads will roll because no matter what explanation they give, if they let that happen, the presidents of Exxon, Shell, and so on, out the window because they failed. And they can't let that happen. They know that.
You're right. This point is so sensible.
Yeah. This is, their skin is on the line, and it all is in conjunction. They have to play that game, and that is a delicate game. It's nuanced, but it's a general, slow, and steady shift. And it's back into their core oil and gas business.
Yeah.
That's it.
Let me share with you. Of course, I have some secret points for you. Saudi Aramco, for instance, let me put bigger to read better. They are going to hydrogen, with a carbon capture. It's a strong point for them, and diversification into non-oil sectors, probably renewables.
Yeah, but listen, it may make sense for them to do some of these things, and it depends on what scale. Diversification for them is essential. 67% of Saudi Arabia's economy is oil based.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
dangerous. It's
High
not
dependency. Yeah,
position, it's because no one can afford to be 67%
perfect.
dependent on one industry. So
Yeah,
they
yeah,
have to develop tourism, they have to develop whatever else,
yeah.
technology
Diversification.
hubs
Yeah,
and so on. This is very important diversification. It makes sense.
perfect.
And Saudi Aramco is their arm to do that. So in their case, that's who has to do the
And
diversification.
Saudi Aramco is a state company, no?
Exactly. So
Uh-huh.
that's their arm to make things happen. In terms
Yeah,
of carbon capture and storage, I think they realize that their projects are what I mentioned on the low end, probably all 80,
yeah.
$100.
But this item is to put oil attractive for the future, because if you are doing carbon capture, you can stay
Yes,
producing oil.
if you are 67 dependent on an industry, you can't let
Yeah,
that industry be at
yeah,
risk. So they
yeah.
have to
That's it.
even hedge
Yeah, yeah.
their
Perfect.
risk. In
Let me
terms
go.
in
Uh,
terms of
Sorry.
hydrogen, I think they're going slow because what they're doing with hydrogen is their solar projects and their wind projects
Yeah.
producing but that's minimal.
No,
And
yeah.
like I
Not,
said, a
not,
couple of years from now, they will
yeah.
decide whether that even makes
Perfect.
sense.
Exxon
Excellent.
focuses on carbon management, of course.
Carbon
Natural gas.
management just means where are we going to bury the carbon, the CO2 in
Yeah.
this well or that?
Natural gas and natural gas that I
It
believe
is,
in
of
a lot
course.
in natural gas and
15
renewable
years
investments, not
ago,
too strong.
everybody recognized that natural gas was the transition fuel.
Is the most
No matter,
important, right?
and
Yeah,
and
no
now we
doubts.
see that it is. It's much cleaner, easier
No
to
doubts.
transport,
No doubts.
global.
Yeah. Chevron, a very American company,
LNG, like I mentioned,
LNG,
key.
it's a key transition
Lower
fuel.
carbon technologies. Of course,
Yeah,
if you have
all of them are doing the same. Yeah,
yeah,
in this
if you
case.
have a rig, that tends to be more of an
Yeah,
efficiency thing. If you can electrify the top side, that's actually much
yeah,
better for operational efficiency.
yeah,
And of course, you also happen to decarbonize.
yeah. And of course, global energy demand. Of course,
Yes,
global.
they can't forget to meet the
Yeah,
demand. If they
that's the
don't,
point. The last point you had. Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
BP shift
BP.
away from production cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now we go back
Giving
to
up
real
shift production
bottom
cuts.
line decisions. Yes,
Yeah,
shifting away from production cost that
yeah,
never made sense.
yeah, yeah. Never makes
You
sense.
could say, "Oh,
And
we're going to invest in something else," but to
and and
consciously decide to cut their core business that was
and as
risky.
all of them, decarbonization goals, of course,
Yes,
no
yes,
doubts.
yes.
Shell
No,
net zero commitment. That's crazy. I cannot
but
understand
but
how they keep
but
this
Kamaya,
commitment for 2050. It's impossible to reach this point.
but
So
Kamaya,
keep doing.
2050, we're 25 years away. That's fine. You can change many of those commitments in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
next 5,
And
10,
people
15,
are
20
not
years.
will not be the same. People are
Exactly.
different.
It looks beautiful. Don't have to worry about it because it's a
Yeah,
long
you're
ways
right.
off.
LNG, of course, they're very
Yes.
strong,
And
and
carbon
carbon
capture,
capture
sure.
initiatives.
Everybody can
Yeah,
go into
sure.
that.
Yeah. Total Energies,
Total
diversification to renewables,
is one of
carbonization.
the most aggressive ones in diversifying into
Yeah,
alternative renewables in
yeah,
particular.
yeah,
That may make sense if the renewables are, for example, biofuels in certain regions where
yeah,
that does carry, a good business sense.
yeah,
Decarbonization, like the other
yeah,
ones,
yeah, like
start
others. Yeah.
putting it.
Yes, and biofuels. And ConocoPhillips, an independent company only for exploration?
uh,
Yes, I suppose yes.
Yeah, but you see, they all have reasonable strategies. None of them are crazy. Maybe you could argue that BP went off on the ledge a
Yeah,
while back, but in general, they are all coming around to the realization. Let's focus on core business. We will continue some of this other stuff, but be
okay.
very selective. And certainly what they have to cut first and foremost are the high-end projects, very expensive,
Okay.
never made sense.
Yeah, perfect.
PetroChina also. Even, but we discussed this.
Carbon.
Even
Carbon.
China, which is the largest
Yeah.
coal user in India, they recognize that that is not something for the future. They're adding more coal plants because they need the energy.
It's interesting because carbon neutrality is a point for everyone. So
Yeah.
no one is forgiven this point. Yeah. And finally, Petrobras.
Yeah.
Sustainable. I don't like this expression, sustainable practice. What does it mean exactly?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can really define that satisfactorily because almost none of those are sustainable. But the second one, investing in biofuels, that is one of the exceptions that I said. For example, Brazil is a powerhouse in ethanol and biofuel, and it has the capacity to increase the scale, and it's already competitive, so that could even be a model for some other countries, Southeast Asia, Africa, other Latin American countries, to increase biofuel.
Those that have areas,
agricultural land. You're not supposed to deforest a forest to do that, but Brazil has millions of acres of degraded land that is amenable to growing biofuel crops, sugarcane and others. This is an evidence that they're not crazy. They understand the challenge. They understand that
they are adapting.
Things are changing. They will change gradually. Some of the talk is much easier to go off on a limb, but legislation and so on will change gradually.
That's great. Thank you, Professor Cleveland Jones, for this nice conversation today.
It was fun. Great. Take care.
Take care.